You ever wonder how a company everyone thought was dead becomes worth more than Apple and Google combined? Here's how Satya Nadella actually did it. February 4th, 2014, Microsoft headquarters in Redmond, Washington. Satya Nadella is sitting in his office at around 6:30 in the morning, and he's been awake since 4 a.m. In a few hours, he's going to be announced as only the third CEO in Microsoft's entire history, following Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. The company's stock is stuck, has been for over a decade actually. The market cap is sitting at around $300 billion, which sounds massive, but here's the thing, it's been basically flat since 2000, 14 years of nothing. Apple just passed them. Google is eating their lunch in search. Amazon is dominating the cloud before Microsoft even understood what cloud computing was. The Windows Phone is a disaster. They just wrote off $7.2 billion on the Nokia acquisition. Developers are leaving the platform in droves. And inside the company, it's toxic. I'm talking about stack ranking, internal warfare, teams literally sabotaging each other to look better in performance reviews. Nadella knows all of this because he's been there for 22 years, he's lived it, watched it decay from the inside. And the decision he's about to make in his first 90 days, it's so radical, so against everything Microsoft stood for, that half the executive team will think he's lost his mind. What he does next will either save the company or destroy what's left of it. Hey, I'm Alex Morgan, this is Behind the Billion. And today we're breaking down how Satya Nadella took Microsoft from a stagnant, declining empire that everyone had written off and turned it into the most valuable company on the planet. $3 trillion. Let me say that again, 3 trillion with a T, and look, I spent the last 2 weeks completely obsessed with this story. I mean genuinely obsessed. I read Nadella's book, hit refresh twice, went through hundreds of pages of shareholder letters, analyst reports, internal emails that leaked over the years, interviews with executives who were in the room when these decisions got made. And here's what blew my mind, the transformation wasn't about technology. I mean, yeah, technology mattered, but the real story. It's about culture, psychology, timing, and one guy who understood that sometimes you have to kill the thing you love to save it. Now, before we get into the main story, let me give you some context about who Satya Nadella actually is, because this matters. This isn't some Silicon Valley founder who dropped out of college to chase a dream. This is a guy who grew up in Hyderabad, India, the son of a civil servant. His dad worked for the Indian Administrative Service, his mom was a Sanskrit scholar, and young Satya, he was obsessed with cricket. I'm not kidding, he played serious competitive cricket and thought that might be his future. But his parents pushed education hard, like really hard, and he ended up studying electrical engineering at Manipal Institute of Technology in India. Here's where it gets interesting though. In 1988, at 21 years old, Nadella comes to the United States to get his master's degree in computer science at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Now, I've read different accounts of this period, but from what I can gather from his own writing and interviews, this was a culture shock moment. He's arriving in America, in Milwaukee of all places, in the middle of winter. He'd never seen snow before. He's trying to figure out American culture, American business, trying to fit in while also standing out academically. And according to his own account, he was lonely, questioning whether he made the right choice leaving India. But he finishes his master's, and in 1992 he joins Microsoft. Now think about the timing here, this is Microsoft at its absolute peak of arrogance and power. Windows is printing money. Bill Gates is the richest person on earth. The company has this attitude of we're the smartest people in the room, everyone else is stupid, and if you're not with us, you're against us. And Nadella joins as just another engineer, employee number whatever, thousands deep into the org chart. Nobody knows his name, he's not special. He's just a smart guy who can code and understands enterprise software. And for the first 22 years, I mean literally over 2 decades, Nadella just grinds. He works on everything. He's in the server division, he's working on database technology. He moves to the business division, works on Bing, which was a disaster, but he learned from it. Works on the nascent cloud stuff that nobody at Microsoft really understood yet. And here's what's crucial, he's watching the company culture deteriorate from the inside. He's experiencing what everyone called stack ranking, which if you don't know what that is, let me explain because it's insane. Stack ranking was this performance review system that Steve Ballmer loved, where every team had to rank their employees on a curve. You had to identify your top 20%, your middle 70%, and your bottom 10%. And that bottom 10%, they were basically marked for firing or being pushed out. Now on paper, this sounds like it might make sense, force excellence, get rid of dead weight, reward top performers. But in practice, it created a culture of internal warfare. I read this account, and I can't verify every detail, but it's been reported widely, where teams would actually sabotage each other's projects to make sure their numbers looked better. You had star engineers refusing to work together because they didn't want to share credit. You had managers gaming the system by hearing people they knew were weak just so they'd have someone to put in that bottom 10%. Nadella is living through this. He's watching brilliant people leave Microsoft to go to Google, to go to Amazon, to go to startups. He's watching the company miss mobile completely. They had Windows Mobile early and blew it. He's watching them miss social, miss search, even though they're pouring billions into Bing. And by 2013, when the CEO search starts because Ballmer announces he's stepping down, Microsoft is in serious trouble. The stock hasn't moved in over a decade. Developers are abandoning the platform. The narrative in Silicon Valley is that Microsoft is a dinosaur, a has-been, a company living off Windows and Office while the world moves to mobile and cloud. Now the CEO search is fascinating, and I dug deep into this. The board initially wasn't even considering Nadella. From the reporting I've seen, they wanted an external candidate, someone with flash, someone who could make a big splash and signal change. They talked to Alan Muley from Ford, they talked to other big-name CEOs, and there was this internal camp pushing for someone from the outside to come in and shake things up. But there was also this contingent, and Bill Gates was part of this apparently, who thought maybe we need someone who understands Microsoft's DNA, who's lived in the culture, who knows where all the bodies are buried. Nadella, to his credit, wasn't sitting around waiting. According to multiple sources, including his own account, he wrote this memo to the board. Now, I haven't seen the full memo, it's never been published as far as I know, but the gist of it based on what's been reported was basically, here's what's broken, here's why we're broken, and here's how I would fix it. And the key insight, the thing that apparently caught the board's attention, was that Nadella didn't blame external factors. He didn't say, oh, Apple got lucky, or Google is unfairly dominant, or the market shifted against us. He said, our culture is broken, we're our own worst enemy, and if we don't fix that, no amount of technology innovation will save us. February 4, 2014, the announcement comes. Satya Nadella is the new CEO of Microsoft. He's 46 years old. He's been at the company for 22 years. And the reaction? Mixed. Some people in the industry thought it was a safe choice, boring even. Some analysts were disappointed they didn't get a splashy external hire. But some people, and I read analyst notes from this period, thought maybe this is exactly what Microsoft needs, someone who knows the company inside and out but also has the credibility to change it. Now here's where the story gets really interesting. Nadella's first 90 days, because what he does in this period, it set the tone for everything that follows. And I want to be really specific here because this matters. His first major decision, he kills stack ranking, just eliminates it completely. Now to people outside Microsoft, this might seem like a small HR thing, but inside the company, this was massive. This was the system that had defined Microsoft's culture for over a decade. And Nadella basically says, this is over, we're not doing this anymore, we're going to evaluate people differently. But he goes further. He starts talking about growth mindset. Now, if you've never heard this term, it comes from Carol Dweck's research at Stanford. The idea is that people with a fixed mindset believe talent is static, you're either smart or you're not, and they avoid challenges because failure means you're not smart. People with a growth mindset believe you can develop abilities, that effort matters, that failure is learning. And Nadella becomes obsessed with this concept. He talks about it constantly. He makes executives read Dweck's book. He starts evaluating leaders based on whether they're demonstrating growth mindset. Now, I'll be honest, when I first read about this, I was skeptical. It sounds like corporate jargon. It sounds like the kind of thing a CEO says to seem thoughtful but doesn't actually mean anything. But then I started reading accounts from people inside Microsoft during this period, and they all said the same thing: the culture actually started to shift. Nadella would be in meetings, and if someone said that's not possible or that's not how we do things, he'd push back and say, why not? What if we tried? What would it take to make it work? And this might sound soft, but it fundamentally changed how decisions got made. But here's the thing, and this is crucial, Nadella wasn't just doing culture stuff. He was making massive strategic bets at the same time. And the biggest one, the one that everyone thought was insane, he decided to embrace open source and Linux. Now let me explain why this was radical. Microsoft, under Gates and Ballmer, had positioned Linux as the enemy. There are famous quotes from Ballmer calling Linux a cancer, saying open source violated intellectual property, saying it was un-American basically. Microsoft's entire business model was built on proprietary software. Windows was closed, Office was closed, everything was licensed and controlled. Nadella in his first year stands on stage at a Microsoft event, and the slide behind him says, Microsoft loves Linux. I'm not making this up. And the crowd, according to people who were there, didn't know how to react. Some people laughed nervously. Some people thought it was a joke, but Nadella was dead serious. He started open sourcing parts of the .NET framework. He made it possible to run Linux on Azure, Microsoft's cloud platform. He started contributing to open source projects. He basically took the thing Microsoft had fought against for 20 years and said, actually, we were wrong, this is the future, we're embracing it. Now, why did this matter? Because developers had abandoned Microsoft. If you were a young programmer in 2014, you weren't building on Windows, you were building on Linux, you were using Python and Ruby and Node.js, you were deploying on AWS. Microsoft was irrelevant to an entire generation of developers, and Nadella understood that if Microsoft couldn't win developers back, the company was dead. It didn't matter how much money Windows and Office were making. If developers weren't building on Microsoft platforms, the future didn't include Microsoft. So he makes this bet, and it's controversial internally. I've read accounts of senior executives, people who've been at Microsoft for decades, who thought this was betraying everything the company stood for. But Nadella pushed it through, and slowly it started working. Developers started coming back to Microsoft events. They started using Azure because now they could run whatever they wanted on it, not just Microsoft technologies. The perception of Microsoft started to shift from, these guys are the evil empire who want to control everything, to, okay, maybe they get it now, maybe they're actually listening. But the even bigger bet, the one that defines Nadella's entire tenure, was cloud. Now, Microsoft had started Azure before Nadella became CEO, but it was a mess. It was poorly positioned, it was trying to be too many things, it was way behind Amazon Web Services, which had a massive head start. And the internal politics around cloud were toxic because the traditional Windows Server business saw cloud as a threat. If customers moved their servers to the cloud, they didn't need to buy Windows Server licenses anymore. So you had this internal conflict where the cash cow business was actively working against the future business. Nadella made a decision, and this is documented in multiple sources. He basically said, we're going all in on cloud even if it cannibalizes our existing business. He restructured the entire company around cloud. He changed how executives were compensated, tying bonuses to cloud growth instead of Windows growth. He moved the best people onto the Azure team. He started reporting cloud revenue separately in earnings calls to force Wall Street to pay attention to it. And this was scary because in the short term, it meant lower margins, it meant revenue recognition issues, it meant sacrificing profitable business for uncertain future business. But here's what's brilliant about the timing. Nadella understood something that I don't think gets talked about enough. In 2014, enterprises were just starting to think seriously about cloud. The early adopters, the tech companies, they'd already moved to AWS. But the big slow-moving enterprises, the banks, the manufacturers, the healthcare companies, they were nervous about cloud. They had security concerns, compliance concerns, they had decades of investment in on-premise infrastructure. And these companies, they trusted Microsoft. They'd been working with Microsoft for 30 years. They had relationships with Microsoft account reps. They had contracts and support agreements. So Nadella positioned Azure not as a competitor to AWS for startups, but as the enterprise cloud. The cloud for companies that needed hybrid solutions, that needed tight integration with their existing Microsoft infrastructure, that needed compliance and security guarantees. And this is my interpretation, but I think the strategy was genius because Microsoft wasn't trying to win a market they'd already lost. They were creating a new market where their existing strengths became advantages instead of liabilities. And it worked. I mean, it really worked. Azure started growing like crazy. By 2016, Azure was growing over 90% year over year. By 2018, it was a real competitor to AWS. And by 2020, Azure was bringing in over $40 billion a year in revenue and growing faster than AWS. Now, AWS is still bigger, don't get me wrong, but Microsoft went from irrelevant in cloud to one of the top 2 players in less than a decade. That's insane. But let me back up because there's another piece of this that's crucial. Office 365. Now, Microsoft Office was already successful. It was basically printing money. Everyone used Word and Excel and PowerPoint, but it was sold as a one-time license. You bought Office, you installed it on your computer, you used it until it broke or you needed new features. And Microsoft would make money when people upgraded, but there was no recurring revenue, no subscription model. Nadella pushed hard to move Office to a subscription model, Office 365. And this was controversial because, again, you're messing with a cash cow. What if people don't want to pay monthly? What if they rebel and stick with the old version? What if revenue drops? But Nadella looked at what Adobe had done with Creative Cloud, what Salesforce had built with SaaS, and he said, subscriptions are the future, we have to do this. And the key insight, and I'm piecing this together from various sources, was that Office 365 wasn't just about subscriptions, it was about cloud integration. Your documents live in OneDrive, you can collaborate in real time, you can access your files from any device, it's always up to date. It transformed Office from software you bought into a service you subscribed to. And financially, it was a gold mine. Instead of people buying Office once every 5 years for $300, they're paying $100 a year forever. The lifetime value of a customer went through the roof. By 2016, Office 365 had over 25 million subscribers. By 2018, it was over 150 million. By 2020, it was bringing in close to $40 billion a year in recurring revenue. And Wall Street loved this because recurring revenue is predictable, it's stable, you can model it, it's worth more than one-time sales. So Microsoft's valuation started climbing not just because revenue was growing, but because the quality of revenue was better. Now let me talk about something that doesn't get enough attention, the Xbox and gaming strategy under Nadella. Because when Nadella became CEO, there were rumors that he might kill Xbox. It had been a money pit for years. The Xbox One launch had been a disaster. They'd been beaten badly by PlayStation. And there were board members, from what I've read, who questioned why Microsoft was even in gaming. But Nadella made a bet that gaming was going to be huge, not just consoles, but gaming as a service, cloud gaming, subscription gaming. He kept Xbox alive, but he changed the strategy. Instead of trying to win the console war, which they were losing, he pivoted to Game Pass. This subscription service where for $10 or $15 a month you get access to hundreds of games, and he started buying game studios. Minecraft had already been acquired for $2.5 billion under Ballmer, but Nadella accelerated this. And then in 2020, he made the biggest acquisition in gaming history, $7.5 billion for ZeniMax Media, which owned Bethesda, id Software, all these iconic game studios. Now at the time, I remember reading analyst reactions and people thought Microsoft was overpaying. $7.5 billion for a game publisher. Are you kidding? But Nadella saw it differently. He wasn't buying game studios, he was buying content for Game Pass. He was building a Netflix for gaming. And when you look at it through that lens, where subscribers are paying monthly forever and you need exclusive content to keep them subscribed, the math totally changes. And then in 2022, he tries to buy Activision Blizzard for $69 billion. $69 billion. I mean, think about how insane that number is. And the deal almost fell apart. Regulators were fighting it. There were lawsuits. The UK blocked it initially. But Nadella fought for it, personally got involved in negotiations, made concessions, and eventually got it done in 2023. And now Microsoft owns Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Candy Crush, all of Activision's properties. Gaming is now Microsoft's third biggest business after cloud and productivity, bringing in over $15 billion a year. But here's where the story takes its most important turn, and this is the decision that I think defines Nadella's legacy: artificial intelligence. Now, Microsoft had been investing in AI research for years. They had Microsoft Research. They had smart people working on machine learning and neural networks, but they weren't leading the conversation. Google DeepMind was getting all the attention. OpenAI was doing cutting-edge research. Facebook was publishing papers. Microsoft was just kind of there, doing research, but not really commercializing it. And then in 2019, Nadella makes a $1 billion investment in OpenAI. Now, at the time, OpenAI was a research lab that hadn't really commercialized anything. They'd published papers, they'd built GPT-2, but they weren't making money, they weren't a product company. And Nadella's deal was structured in this really interesting way where Microsoft would provide Azure cloud credits for OpenAI to train their models. And in exchange, Microsoft would get access to OpenAI's technology and the exclusive right to commercialize it through Azure. Now, I don't know the exact conversations between Nadella and Sam Altman. I wasn't in those meetings. But from interviews both of them have given, it seems like Nadella recognized that OpenAI was onto something big with large language models, and that Microsoft's advantage was the distribution and infrastructure to actually make it useful to businesses. And he was willing to bet big on it before anyone else really understood what it could become. And then ChatGPT launches in November of 2022, and it's the fastest growing consumer application in history. 100 million users in 2 months. And Microsoft, because of that partnership, has exclusive access to the underlying technology. And Nadella doesn't waste any time. Within months, Microsoft announces they're integrating GPT into everything. Bing gets ChatGPT integration, which actually makes Bing interesting for the first time ever. I mean, people are actually talking about using Bing. Office gets Copilot, where AI can write your emails and summarize your documents and create PowerPoint presentations. GitHub gets Copilot for coding. Every Microsoft product is getting AI features. And then in January of 2023, Nadella announces Microsoft is investing another $10 billion in OpenAI. $10 billion. And he structures it so that Microsoft gets 49% of OpenAI's profits until they get their money back plus interest, and then it drops to a smaller percentage, but Microsoft retains exclusive cloud provider rights. It's an incredibly favorable deal for Microsoft. And from what I can tell from the public reporting, Nadella personally negotiated a lot of this deal. He was in the room with Sam Altman working through the terms. Now think about the timing of this. When ChatGPT launched, Google panicked. They rushed out Bard, which was half-baked and full of errors. Meta scrambled to catch up. Amazon was behind. And Microsoft, for the first time in decades, was actually ahead of Google on something important. I mean, search was Google's thing, AI was supposed to be Google's thing, and here's Microsoft with this partnership with OpenAI making Google look slow and old. And Wall Street went crazy. Microsoft's stock, which had been on a tear anyway, just exploded. The narrative became, Microsoft is the AI leader, they're going to integrate AI into all their products. Azure is going to be the platform everyone builds AI on. This is a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. And Nadella, to his credit, leaned into this. Every earnings call, every interview, he's talking about AI, he's talking about Copilot, he's talking about how every product is becoming AI first. By early 2024, Microsoft's market cap crossed $3 trillion. $3 trillion. To put that in perspective, when Nadella became CEO in 2014, Microsoft was worth about $300 billion. He added $2.7 trillion in market cap in 10 years. That's more value created than the entire value of most companies on Earth. It's one of the greatest value creation stories in business history. But let me talk about something that I think is really important and doesn't get discussed enough: the culture transformation. Because yes, the strategy was brilliant, the bets on cloud and AI paid off massively. But the reason Microsoft could execute on those bets was because Nadella fixed the culture. And I want to give you specific examples because this matters. There's this story, and I read about it in multiple sources, where in one of Nadella's early executive meetings, they're discussing a problem with a product, and one of the senior leaders starts blaming another team for the failure. And apparently Nadella stopped the meeting and said something like, "I don't care whose fault it is, I care how we fix it together." And from the accounts I've read, that kind of intervention happened constantly in the first couple years. He was actively reshaping how leaders interacted with each other. Another thing he did, and this is documented, he changed how the company celebrated success. Under Ballmer, success was about beating competitors. I mean, Ballmer would literally jump around on stage yelling about crushing Google and destroying the competition. And Nadella shifted the language to be about customers and impact. Instead of "we beat AWS this quarter," it was, "we helped this many companies transform their business." It sounds subtle, but it changed the internal mindset from zero-sum competition to positive-sum value creation. And he also did something really smart with acquisitions and partnerships. Microsoft had a history of buying companies and then just absorbing them and destroying the culture and losing all the talent. Like, remember Nokia? Total disaster. Bought them for $7 billion, wrote off almost all of it, killed the brand. Or a quantitative $6 billion for an ad company that went nowhere. Microsoft had this reputation of being where good companies went to die. But under Nadella, LinkedIn acquisition, $26 billion in 2016. And instead of integrating it into Microsoft and ruining it, Nadella let LinkedIn stay independent. Jeff Weiner stayed as CEO, they kept the brand, they kept the culture, they just gave them Microsoft's resources and cloud infrastructure. And it worked. LinkedIn is now worth way more than what Microsoft paid for it. It's growing, it's profitable, it's a huge asset. Same thing with GitHub, bought for $7.5 billion in 2018. Kept it independent, kept the CEO, kept the brand, let them do their thing, but gave them Azure integration and Microsoft's enterprise sales force. And GitHub has grown massively since the acquisition. It's become central to how developers work, and it feeds into Microsoft's developer ecosystem. This showed a level of sophistication that Microsoft hadn't demonstrated before. The old Microsoft would have tried to slap the Microsoft brand on everything and integrate it into the org chart and impose the Microsoft way of doing things. The new Microsoft under Nadella understood that sometimes the value is in the culture and the independence, and the right move is to be hands-off. Now let me connect some dots here because I think there's a pattern that's really important. If you look at Nadella's biggest bets, cloud, Office 365, gaming, AI, they all have something in common. They're all about recurring revenue and platform power. Cloud is a platform where other companies build. Office 365 is a subscription that locks in customers. Gaming is becoming subscription-based with Game Pass. AI is being integrated as a platform through Azure OpenAI service. This is a fundamental shift from the old Microsoft model. The old Microsoft sold products. Windows was a product, you bought it. Office was a product, you bought it. The new Microsoft sells platforms and services, and the financial implications are massive. Products have low lifetime value and high customer acquisition costs. Platforms have network effects and lock-in. Services have recurring revenue and expanding margins as they scale. Nadella understood this shift earlier and more deeply than almost any other CEO at a big tech company. I mean, look at Apple, they're still primarily a hardware company, they're trying to build services, but it's not the core business. Look at Google, they're still primarily advertising, they've struggled to build successful subscription businesses. Amazon is cloud and e-commerce, but they've had to diversify because retail has low margins. Microsoft under Nadella became a pure subscription and platform company, and Wall Street values that model higher than almost anything else. Now I want to talk about some criticism because it's not all perfect. There are people who argue that Nadella got lucky, that he inherited Windows and Office which just print money, and that gave him the financial flexibility to make big bets without worrying about profitability. And look, there's some truth to that. If Nadella had been CEO of a struggling startup, he couldn't have invested $10 billion in OpenAI. The legacy businesses gave him room to maneuver. But here's my counter to that, and this is my interpretation, Every CEO of Microsoft had those same cash cows, and Ballmer didn't turn the company around. Gates didn't see the cloud coming. Having resources is one thing, deploying them wisely is completely different. Nadella could have kept milking Windows and Office, done stock buybacks, paid dividends, kept shareholders happy in the short term. Instead, he bet big on the future, even though it meant cannibalizing existing businesses and taking short-term margin hits. There's also criticism that Microsoft under Nadella has become too powerful, that they're building monopolistic positions in cloud and AI, that the OpenAI partnership is anti-competitive. And I'm not going to wade into the regulatory stuff because that's complicated and ongoing. But it's fair to say that Microsoft is once again a dominant force in technology, and that raises questions about competition and innovation. And there's internal criticism too. I've read accounts from former Microsoft employees who say the culture is better than it was under Ballmer, but it's still not perfect. There's still bureaucracy, there's still politics, there's still pressure and stress. Nadella didn't create some utopia. He made it functional and focused, but it's still a massive corporation with all the issues that come with that. But here's what's undeniable, the results. When Nadella took over in 2014, Microsoft's market cap was around $300 billion. As I'm recording this, it's over $3 trillion. That's a 10 times increase in value in about 10 years. The stock price has gone from around $37 to over $400 per share, adjusted for splits. Total shareholder return under Nadella is something like 1,000%. That's not luck, that's execution. And it's not just about market cap. Revenue has grown from around $86 billion in fiscal year 2014 to over $210 billion in fiscal year 2023. Operating income has more than doubled. Cloud revenue went from basically nothing to over $100 billion a year. Office 365 has hundreds of millions of subscribers. Gaming is a huge business. The company is fundamentally different and fundamentally stronger than it was a decade ago. Now let me talk about Nadella as a leader because I think his personal story matters. This is a guy who wasn't the obvious choice. He wasn't the flashy outsider. He wasn't the founder with the reality distortion field. He was a career Microsoft guy, an engineer who worked his way up, who understood the technology deeply but also understood people and culture. And I think that combination is rare. There's this moment that I read about and it stuck with me. Nadella's son Zain was born with cerebral palsy. It's a serious condition. Zain needed constant care, and Nadella has talked about how that experience changed him, made him more empathetic, more understanding of different perspectives. And I think you can see that in how he leads. He talks about empathy as a core leadership skill. He talks about understanding what customers need, what employees need, what partners need. It's not just about being the smartest person in the room, it's about listening and adapting. And there's been tragedy too. His son Zain passed away in 2022 at 26 years old. I can't imagine what that's like, and Nadella has been private about his grief, which I respect. But the point is, this is a human being who's dealt with serious personal challenges while running one of the biggest companies in the world, and somehow he's maintained focus and drive and vision. I also think Nadella's background as an immigrant matters. He came to the US from India. He had to prove himself in a system that didn't automatically reward him. He had to navigate cultural differences. He had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition initially. And I think that gave him resilience and perspective that someone who grew up with privilege might not have. This is speculation on my part, but I think his outsider background made him more willing to question assumptions and challenge the Microsoft orthodoxy. Now let's talk about the AI bet specifically, because I think this is the most important decision of Nadella's tenure. When he invested in OpenAI in 2019, nobody was talking about large language models becoming consumer products. This was esoteric research, academic stuff. GPT-2 had been released, but it wasn't mind-blowing. It was interesting to AI researchers, but not to normal people. And Nadella committed $1 billion, which was real money even for Microsoft. And then in 2020 and 2021, OpenAI is working on GPT-3, and Nadella is getting early access because of the partnership. And from what I've read, he recognized that this was qualitatively different from previous AI. This wasn't narrow AI that could do one task. This was something that could do many tasks, that could understand and generate human language in a way that felt almost human. And he made a decision, and this is documented in various interviews and reports, to make AI the organizing principle for all of Microsoft's product development. Everything needed AI integration. Every product team needed to think about how AI could enhance their product. This wasn't a side project, this was the future of the company. And when ChatGPT launched and went viral, Microsoft was ready. They had the infrastructure, they had the partnership, they had the strategy. Google was caught flat-footed. They had their own AI research, they had published important papers, but they hadn't commercialized it, they hadn't integrated it into products. They were too worried about cannibalizing search revenue. Microsoft didn't have that problem. Bing was already losing to Google, so they had nothing to lose and everything to gain by making Bing AI-powered. And the launch of Bing with ChatGPT integration was brilliant marketing. Suddenly people were talking about Bing. Tech journalists were writing articles about how Bing might actually challenge Google. Market share ticked up. It's still small, but it's growing. More importantly, it positioned Microsoft as the AI leader, as the company that gets it, that's moving fast, that's putting AI in the hands of users. And then Copilot for Office, this is a potential gold mine. Microsoft has hundreds of millions of Office users paying subscription fees. If even a fraction of them pay an extra $30 a month for Copilot features, that's billions in additional revenue. And early reports suggest adoption is strong. Enterprises are buying it. People find it useful. It's not perfect, it makes mistakes, but it's good enough to save people time, and that's all that matters. The Azure OpenAI service is another huge opportunity. This is where Microsoft makes OpenAI's models available to other businesses through Azure. So if you're a company that wants to build AI features into your product but you don't have the resources to train your own models, you can just use Azure OpenAI service. And you pay Microsoft for the compute and the API calls, and Microsoft has exclusivity on this through their OpenAI partnership. It's a brilliant way to monetize the technology and lock customers into Azure. Now the OpenAI drama in November of 2023 is worth discussing. Sam Altman gets fired by the OpenAI board, there's chaos, employees threaten to quit, Microsoft is scrambling. And Nadella, from the reporting I read, got personally involved. He talked to Sam Altman, offered him a job at Microsoft to come build AI there, talked to the OpenAI board, talked to investors. And within days, the situation resolved. Altman was back as CEO of OpenAI, the board was reshuffled, and Microsoft's position was actually strengthened because they got a board seat. Now, I don't know all the details of what happened behind the scenes. A lot of it is still private and probably always will be. But the way Nadella handled it showed a level of strategic thinking and relationship management that was impressive. He could have panicked, he could have tried to seize control, he could have walked away. Instead, he played it cool, supported Altman, worked with all parties to find a resolution, and came out of it with Microsoft's position stronger than before. And looking at where things stand now, Microsoft is in an incredibly strong position. They're a $3 trillion company, they're growing revenue in the double digits even at that scale. They have strong positions in multiple massive markets: cloud, productivity software, gaming, AI. They have recurring revenue models that Wall Street loves. They have a CEO who's proven he can execute and transform the company. The narrative around Microsoft has completely flipped from "this is a declining legacy company" to "this is one of the most important companies shaping the future of technology." Now, is it all perfect? No, there are challenges. Competition is fierce. Google and Amazon aren't going to just give up cloud market share. There are regulatory pressures. Governments are looking at big tech more skeptically. There are execution risks. AI is moving fast and Microsoft needs to keep up. There are cultural challenges. Maintaining innovation and agility at the scale is hard. But compared to where Microsoft was 10 years ago, the position is night and day different. Let me also talk about what I think are the key lessons from Nadella's transformation of Microsoft, because I think there are patterns here that apply beyond just this one company. First lesson: culture is strategy. Nadella didn't start with a 5-year plan and a new product roadmap. He started with fixing the internal culture because he understood that a toxic culture would sabotage any strategy. And he was right. The shift from stack ranking to growth mindset, from internal competition to collaboration, that unlocked the ability to execute. Second lesson: be willing to kill your darlings. Nadella cannibalized Windows Server revenue to grow Azure. He shifted Office from one-time sales to subscriptions, which was risky. He embraced open source and Linux even though it went against Microsoft's identity. You can't transform a company by protecting the past. You have to be willing to disrupt yourself before someone else does. Third lesson: timing matters. Nadella became CEO at exactly the right time. Enterprises were ready for cloud but hadn't committed yet, so Azure could compete. Mobile had already been lost, so Microsoft didn't waste resources chasing it. AI was early enough that making big bets could pay off. If he'd become CEO 5 years earlier or 5 years later, the opportunities would have been different. Fourth lesson: strategic partnerships can be more valuable than acquisitions. The OpenAI partnership gave Microsoft access to cutting-edge AI without having to build it all internally. The cost was billions of dollars, but it was cheaper and faster than trying to compete directly. And Microsoft kept optionality. They're not dependent on OpenAI. They have their own AI research too, but the partnership accelerated everything. Fifth lesson: distribution beats innovation. OpenAI built the technology, but Microsoft had the distribution, the enterprise relationships, the cloud infrastructure, the products that millions of people already use. By integrating OpenAI's innovation into Microsoft's distribution, they created something more valuable than either could have done alone. This is a pattern you see over and over. The company with the better distribution wins, even if they didn't invent the technology. Sixth lesson: long-term thinking wins. Nadella made bets that hurt short-term margins but positioned Microsoft for long-term dominance. Wall Street was skeptical of cloud investments initially. They wanted more buybacks and dividends. But Nadella stuck with the strategy, and now Microsoft's valuation reflects that long-term value creation. If he'd optimized for quarterly earnings, Microsoft would be worth a fraction of what it is now. Now let me talk about where I think Microsoft goes from here, and this is pure speculation on my part, but it's based on the patterns I'm seeing. I think AI is going to be absolutely central to everything Microsoft does for the next decade. Every product is getting AI features, every business unit is reorganizing around AI, every earnings call is dominated by AI metrics. This isn't a fad, this is a fundamental platform shift, like the shift from mainframes to PCs or from PCs to cloud. I think Microsoft is going to keep investing heavily in OpenAI and AI research. They might increase their stake if the opportunity arises, they might acquire other AI companies, they'll definitely keep pouring money into Azure AI infrastructure. This is an arms race, and Microsoft is committed to winning it, or at least being one of the top 2 players with Google. I think gaming is going to become an even bigger part of Microsoft's business. The Activision acquisition is huge, but it's also just the beginning. I think Microsoft wants to be the Netflix of gaming, where Game Pass is the primary way people play games and they don't buy individual titles anymore. And if they can pull that off, the recurring revenue potential is massive, hundreds of millions of subscribers paying $15 a month. I think Microsoft is going to face serious regulatory scrutiny. They're too big, they're too powerful in too many markets, and governments are paying attention. I don't know if they'll face antitrust action or forced breakups, but it's definitely a risk. Nadella will need to navigate that carefully, and his approach so far has been to be cooperative and collaborative with regulators rather than combative. And I think Nadella's legacy is already secure. Even if Microsoft stock crashed tomorrow, even if everything fell apart, what he did in 10 years is remarkable. He took a company that was written off, that people thought was a dinosaur, and made it the most valuable company on earth. He transformed the culture, he made massive strategic bets that paid off. He positioned Microsoft at the center of the most important technology trends of our time. And personally, from everything I've read, he did it with grace and humility and empathy. He's not a showman like Ballmer, he's not a visionary cult leader like Jobs, he's not a ruthless competitor like Bezos. He's a thoughtful, strategic, empathetic leader who understands people and technology and business. And in some ways, that might be exactly what Microsoft needed. Look, I've spent 2 weeks researching this story, and I'm still finding new details and nuances. This is a complex transformation with hundreds of decisions and thousands of people involved. I'm sure I got some details wrong, I'm sure there are parts of the story I don't know, but the overall arc is clear. Satya Nadella took Microsoft from stagnant to dominant, from written off to most valuable, from toxic culture to growth mindset. That's the story. That's how you save a dying company and turn it into a $3 trillion empire. Hey. Alright, so that's the deep dive on Satya Nadella and the transformation of Microsoft. That's how you take a company everyone thought was finished and turn it into the most valuable company on the planet. $3 trillion, 10 times increase in market cap in 10 years. It's one of the greatest turnaround stories in business history. Now look, I'm sure there are details I couldn't verify, conversations that happened behind closed doors that we'll never know about, strategic decisions that had more complexity than I could capture. But the core pattern is clear. Fix the culture, make big bets on the future even if it hurts the present, embrace what you previously fought against, and execute relentlessly. If you want more stories like this, real research into how the biggest companies actually got built, not the sanitized PR version but the messy reality, hit that subscribe button. I release new episodes every single day, deep dives into the decisions and moments that created billion-dollar empires. I'm Alex Morgan. Thanks for listening to Behind the Billion.